show, recent episodes, and general science concepts and news. We'll be starting in just a moment, and feel free to put your questions right into the chat for our mods to come and screen, and please try to keep them clear, legible, and understandable. As always, we welcome super chats to help support the show, and you can also find links to our website and other options in the episode description. With all that said, welcome, and let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur, live streaming this day on July 30th, 2023, and as always, joined by my lovely co-host and wife, Sarah Fowler Arthur. So, we'll go ahead and take right to your questions, and as always, please put them in as clear and concise a format as you can to get them in the chat so they can be relayed on to be asked today. Do we have any to start off with?
We do. We have a question from Albert Jackinson, who's a big fan of the show and a regular. He said, recently, I read a chapter of Starry Messenger by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and in the chapter about exploration and discovery, Neil appeared to demonstrate with examples from 1870 until now in 30-year intervals, change in technology was always exponential due to how ideas are spread. This is different than the singularity, at least in the way I understand it. What do you think of this idea? Since, if I remember rightly, you have said in the past that singularity as an idea is too simplistic.
I think that's probably not what he was going for there, is to say that's a definite thing either. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the idea there is we can cherry pick things very easily when it comes to technological progress. I'll give you an example. Something else that's grown in roughly 30 years intervals is the human population. In fact, in the last century, it doubled every 50 years. That's exponential growth. So if I'm just looking at something that seems to be a exponentially growing thing in that time, wouldn't it seem like we'd expect to have an exponentially growing resource, you have an exponentially growing population, because you have exponentially growing people. So if you suddenly stop having that, then that wouldn't be the case. But we actually had more than that, right? We went from a civilization at the beginning of last century where most people could not read, even in Western countries. And yet, over that century, we went to one in which going to college became almost routine. It was something that a very large percentage of the population did, as opposed to a rarity, and a lot of it was STEM. And they could actually have careers in that. So we probably went from having maybe 1 in 1,000 people working in science and engineering in some fashion to probably more, probably a few percent at least. And that population went from being about 1 or 2 billion to being about 6 or 7 by the end of the century. So why would it be the least bit surprising that we had an exponential growth in technology? And why would we assume that technology itself was what was making us exponentially grow faster? This is one of those things where we can get ourselves in trouble by basically engaging in numerology a lot of times with science. It's how you end up thinking the asteroid belt must have been a destroyed planet just because it works out in terms of distances, if we're very picky about how we choose to look at the number intervals of planets in AU. I don't think there's any reason to think that we're having an exponential growth in technology because technology somehow exponentially grows itself. It's a feedback process of tons of different variables. I invent a better farming technique, and now I got twice as many people, and I get more research done. Alternatively, I invent a better battery, and that itself can be very handy, but doesn't result, that might be more of a technological jump, but doesn't result in a doubling of population, so there's not as big a technological increase, right? Which piece of technology has been rapidly improving, and how does that affect things? To just kind of fit in that curve like that, it's either overly simplistic or it's a trivial assumption. Of course, technological projects have been going up in the last century. We've had so many more people working on it, putting so much more funding into it, things like that. And at the same time, how do you actually measure technological progress? It's not a video game with a tree. It's just like 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step. We have long periods where it's been relatively slow, and now it's been faster in the last century or two. Will that continue? Don't know, right? We have no way of knowing if that's going to keep going on indefinitely, but we can't just assume that. A lot of processes in nature will show a curve that fits very well for good reasons, and then suddenly changes dynamic when you get to another boundary condition. So I don't think that's terribly relevant. I see what he's going for there. I've seen it from other folks too, but I can't agree with the assumption that it's going to keep coffee up. All right.
It looks like we're getting quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to try to keep picking some of these ones that have a little quicker answer for a time. We have a question from Rob Hawk. He wants to know what the sci-fi novel that you mentioned previously about humans encountering intelligent aliens that were not sentient. Does that one ring a bell?
Yeah, that would be Peter Watts' Blindside. Blindside, Peter Watts, I want to say 2010-ish, but it's in the last century. So it was our first book of the month, actually, I think. Although Asimov had a short story that was our first book of the month. Peter Watts' Blindside, great novel.
All right, then we have a question from Clash. Does Mercury have the potential to become a major exporter of raw materials? Transfer windows to the other planets are frequent, and it has no atmosphere, which makes shooting stuff into space easy.
Oh yeah, we had the episode Colonizing Mercury some years back. It was the second iteration of us doing the Outward Bound series. That we the big three like Titan, Mars, and Venus. We came back and did Mercury, and I thought what was fascinating about that was just kind of seeing how much more options they really were to colonize the place than we tend to think. And I would say that in some ways it's one of the best colonization targets, but it's where we have to start saying, well, what exactly do we mean by colonization or settlement? Does it mean people really live there much, or is it more of an idea that that's where we're really resource extracting from? And the potential is simply, as you say, the gravity's not that high. There's no atmosphere on the way. There's a great power source to run something like an electromagnetic rail system, and there's no clouds. There's no quick nights, so you have a steady power supply the whole time. And so you can just file things off volley after volley into space, and it's got almost as much material in it as Mars does, and that makes it like number 5 for reasonable export in the solar system.
Awesome. So Thought Criminal says, what is your opinion of Eliezer Yudkowsky's claims that IA will almost certainly lead to human extinction? Do you agree with him, and what do you think are the odds of AI doom? No,
and I have a lot of respect for what goes on there and at Less Wrong in terms of just kind of thought experiment stuff. Locals, Basilisk, etc. Very interesting as a basic thought experiment, but we really get this trap with the singularity of just assuming inevitability of these things. What does it take to stop technological progress? Nothing. Literally, that's all you gotta do is do nothing. We spend huge amounts of effort to maintain technological progress. I regularly get involved in fundraising efforts to help out on science. I got another one coming up soon to try to help out on New Horizons and some other projects like that. It takes huge effort to keep pushing science forward. Not just researchers, but convincing people that want to pay money for it. So if you want to stop AI progressing, all you have to do is say, we're done.
No more money.
Yeah. Yep. And I think people they're all processes. We say, well, history is like a wheel. Now, a wheel is an artificial machine you make that moves from point A to point B in a circle and then stops when you want it to. History is not like that. It's not cyclical that way. Not some kind of constant wheel around. Things change each time. And that wheel, again, goes from point A to point B and then stops. But do not assume history has some kind of inertia that forces things forward that we cannot stop. It's a social construct. Everything we do is what we want it to be. If we choose to stop doing this research, it stops.
Or as we tell the kids, you have choices and choices have consequences.
Yes.
Mr. Mahan says, what key technology would make interstellar colonizing viable?
AI.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be human intelligent. And something to remember, because we just talked about Peter Watt's Blindside novel, it's a good reminder, and it's a bigger concern these days, is that in that novel, they're not human intelligent, but they're a huge threat. And he shows how intelligent and necessarily all that important. The biggest thing with AI that's changed in the last decade is realizing that it doesn't have to be as smart as us to be extinction level threat, beyond just a gray goose scenario. And so that's kind of the concern, is we can definitely stop this stuff before it gets to the AI human level intelligence. It's trying to figure out where it's going to be dangerous at, and that's harder to say. Somewhere between the gray goo, pay-per-click maximizer, Skynet scenarios, there's a danger zone, and we need to stay clear of that. And I think that we can, but it's one of the situations where automation AI is so useful for things like space colonization that they, you almost you don't have to use them, but you probably should. So it's like everything else we do. It is walking a tightrope, and if you fall off, well, then you fall off.
That sounds painful. Let's try to stay on.
Well, it might be quick and painless.
I suppose. We have a super chat from Ivan Fessler. Thank you. How would we build roads on the moon, and what materials would we use?
I would say there's a lot of different approaches you could take for that, but depending on where you're at, you might say, well, we're just going to scrape off regolith till we get to something less powdery beneath, because you got a big dust layer there, till we get some layer of melted something or other, hard rock, whatever it happens to be. Or you might say, well, let's compact stuff up and above, so that when dust is being pushed around by, there's no wind, but a little collision or something like that, so it's like it'll blow over top. I would almost say from the outset that one of your smarter processes for building roads on the moon would be to kind of do the raised platform compacted approach. But so much is going to depend on how easy we find it is to actually process these things and putting power in. One advantage you have with the moon is you do not have to have stuff on the ground. The gravity is so low there and there's so little wind to shake things that you can just do raised platforms the whole way. You could have a bridge running over top all your cradles and problems that was this thick, because you got metal plenty and it don't have to be that strong, and you just run over top of that. You just do railroads everywhere potentially. We won't know the answer to that till we actually are there trying to set these landing pads and need practice doing that. But one of the most important bits of infrastructure we know after Apollo that we need to put in there right from the get-go is those launch pads. You cannot land on that dirt without a problem, that regolith. And so that's where we're going to learn how we best build roads. But that would be how we do it.
I think our next question, or series of questions here from Wolf Killer Q, probably would make a great research project for somebody's school paper and maybe even a great entrepreneurial business opportunity. He wants to know how the future of pizza will change in technology and automation, and including how it's made, delivered, and the potentially strange new types of pizza that may come about. Mm-hmm. Sounds like a business opportunity.
It does. Well, I mean, this is an example. You might decide the easiest way to do this is with a drone that's got an oven in it. So the ingredients are all put in by the robot at the, I don't want to name brand somebody, at the pizza place, which we'll call Domino's. And then they are stuck into the drone pizza oven, and it uses the excess heat of running its engines to run that oven as it goes to the place it is going to deliver that pizza. That is a possibility, right? And it might run several pizzas at once and do that whole process. Or it might be that we cook them cook them there and the drone's taken away to you, or you might still be using human delivery people for a while.
What if you get them cooked on site? I mean, wouldn't that be pretty awesome?
Well, but do you want one to actually cooked on site?
They could bring all the ingredients right to your door, pick them up what you want on the way, cook it on site, prepare it.
I was thinking one of the biggest differences in the next decade we're going to have to get used to, that's going to be that big kind of change we have, that generational change, is that groceries are going to start getting delivered again very regularly. And I don't mean as a minor novelty. It's not going to result in everyone needing the groceries delivered all the time. But I think what we're going to see is for that and a lot of other retail moving not necessarily away from the big box stores, but the idea that half your business is that in-site location shopping and the other half of your business is sending it to people at their individual houses who have ordered. And how people best master and put that together is probably going to be, the difference between who the next big Walmart or Amazon is and then who is the next Kmart or some other company that went out of business or went and dropped down in business because they didn't adapt as well. And so too quiet. So, next question.
Mr. ACP 1911, thank you for your super chat. What is your thought on this UFO nonsense in Congress? Wouldn't the Occam's razor say that it is most likely that whistleblowers are government agents who are pushing for more black projects dollars?
That's a possibility. Occam's razor has a tendency to slice people into little bits and not as obviously as we would think. I don't really have to fall back on that too much for explanations of phenomena, because if it were a phenomena, a lot of times, Occam's razor is a subjective kind of thing. What's the simplest answer for that thing we saw in the sky? Well, a UFO actually is a really simple answer for why. What's that weird thing moving around in the sky? So is the idea that it's a falling meteorite, for instance, or weather balloon. There are thousands and thousands of weather balloons. So the reason why we still have to go for that source. As the congressional hearings, I suspect that's going to turn out to be a lot more all ado about nothing than a lot of folks feel. But at the same time, I'm glad they're having them. I am probably one of the most skeptical people about aliens out there. A lot of folks are like, well, it isn't alien visitations, but there's surely alien civilizations in the galaxy. I'm not even sure there's no alien civilization or Hubble volume at this point, So, and yet at the same time, I remember when a lot of people in the sciences would not touch the question of aliens with a 10-foot pole because they are afraid they'd be kicked out of academia or shamed. Now they don't have to be, and they shouldn't have been in the first place. It's a completely legitimate area of discussion scientifically, philosophically, and as a matter of national concern. I happen to think the answer is going to be no. but I don't think everyone should be hesitant to discuss it at any level of government or academia. So I'm glad for that, but at the same time, I don't expect it to turn out with the result that a lot of people are expecting, where we have the little green men locked up in Roswell, for instance. But we'll see, won't we?
So if you see on the screen there that smiley face with the sunglasses, Donald B. said they recently installed a pizza vending machine at his uni. The future is here.
It always doesn't catch on in some ways too. I remember those little packaged sandwiches you get, little slice and diagonal sandwiches from the vending machines. They're really popular in the 90s, or I shouldn't say really popular, very common in the 90s. They almost completely disappeared because not only did they taste like cardboard, they felt like they should taste like cardboard.
Ew. Yuck. Andre Jones, thank you for your super chat. How long do you think it will take for humans to speciate, in your best guess?
10 minutes. No, I think somebody had given a value on that. I'm trying to remember what it is right now. I saw that not that long back as how long it would take to speciate. It was a comment on one of our episodes even. But I think they said that with like 1,000 planets, you should be able to have a speciation event in like 50 years, where you start having ones that were not related to each other. That seems incredibly too short to me. But at the same time, and then let's add another one on there. These things only ever actually make sense in a technological context, because you're not going and settling on other planets unless you got technology all over the place. And then you should ask yourself how much speciation takes place, because we'll make fun of like how easily in Star Trek people have like half Betazoid, half human, or half Vulcan, half human kids, and it is rife for making fun of because it's very absurd in some ways. On the other hand, when you got enough technology, you can make stuff like that happen. And I hate to say, in the Star Trek universe, they could very easily play around with DNA or just build something composite-wise with things that didn't even share DNA. These guys use something completely different and just make something that was the equivalent of a hybrid because they really wanted to. That's the option on the table there. You can just brute force it. So I think in that context, humans don't ever really speciate, because if you had like centaur humans that have been engineered on some planet like we see in House of Suns, we'd still be able to find some way to mix them back together with us if we wanted to.
And if brute force isn't working,
you're not using enough of it, yeah.
Crab, do you think the room temperature ambient pressure superconductor is real? And if so, what are its effects?
Peer review and checking it out would be great. I think this is the big thing. We are getting closer to that, but it's not really one of those things where it's like, wow, we're going to make this breakthrough where, we just keep pushing at it. There either is or is not a material that will superconduct at room temperature and pressure. And if there is, we'll find it by just keep pushing at the window a little bit. If not, nothing we do is going to push that. I would say in many ways that we're already at the point where we've got stuff that's good enough. It just hasn't become streamlined enough in terms of figure out, like, we keep finding better ones, so why go to billions of dollars of effort to get one working that isn't quite as good as the one that's going to come out in a couple of years? But there will get to be a point where we say, we have this material, it's expensive, but we can superconduct for you at negative 10 Celsius and inside a slightly pressurized package. That's great. We can make a wire that's going to do that, and that's what we'll do all new trunk lines in. But we kind of embarrass you to spend $1 trillion on electric upgrades and change around all your architecture for your electronics. And then someone comes out the next day with, look, I got a warm temperature one. That's kind of the problem that we have with technology, is we get some new things, say, why don't we upgrade to doing that? And then people say, well, it's going to take us at least a decade, a huge amount of money to do that. And based on the current pattern, if we wait 5 years before you can get this project to roll, then we'll have something better going on. So
that could be a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
Matthew K. says, do you think that interdimensional travel is more likely than faster than light?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. I think that anything involving FTL in this universe, the way that people tend to mean it, as opposed to something that's traveling away from us faster than light, relies way too much on the idea of negative things being real, as opposed to things like negative electric charge being real, which is because it's negative because we say it's negative. It's just the opposite, right? We have no reason to think they're all negative quantities, and in the absence of these things existing, you're not going to get FTL. I've never seen any method for that. Now, the flip side of that is there is nothing stopping you, if there is other dimensions or realities congruent to our own or whatever, from going to those. We just have no evidence they exist. and kind of like the negative matter, I suppose, except that we have reason to believe that one might exist, whereas there should be negative matter floating around our universe. We would expect other universes to be floating around our universe. So if they exist and can actually exchange matter or energy or even just information, there should be a way to do that. And if you can detect them, that means they're exchanging matter or energy or information. So if we can ever detect these other universes, it strongly implies we could actually travel to them in some fashion.
The next question is from Philaril, and he's talking about the German sci-fi series Perry Roden from the 60s. Yeah. And he said that there had a solar system with 3 planets in a single orbit at 120-degree increments. Would such things even be achievable?
Achievable is kind of the key word there, because you could do it artificially. That's kind of like the Kepler rosette. I have not read Perry Roden. I've heard it suggested a few times, and it was very popular. When I was in Germany, it was it's a book series I hear about a little bit more often there, but I never read it. I don't know if it's been translated or not. But assuming that I'm getting the right image there, that you basically have a circular orbit around a star with 3 planets evenly spaced on that orbit. Yeah, that one might be pushing it. It helps a lot if you got them at the 60-degree increment, because that's where your L4 and L5 all is 60 degrees off. But I'd have to run the numbers, see if 3 would actually be allowed, but 6 does. Anything above that starts working just fine, so you just evenly space them until they're a ring. And that's a Kepler rosette. I think that's definitely an option you have available, but you only do that if you really want to have big, gigantic spherical planets that are all the same mass and artificially made and put them in circular orbits, because otherwise that's a lot of perturbation. Although, to be fair, if you can make that happen, you can also restabilize that. That's a big thing to remember. Things like ring worlds or Dyson spheres. Say, well, this thing is inherently unstable. And say, the people who built that in the first place can fix that problem. They can brute force it if they don't have something more elegant. But if you can build a planet, you can move a planet. It's similar energy levels. So.
And if brute force isn't working,
you can't. You're just not using enough of it.
Thought Criminal says, what is your opinion of Robert Nozick's experience machine thought experiment, and how far away do you think the technology to replicate any experiences, and what are the implications? I think that's like 3 questions.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think I remember what that is, but I'm not sure. So if you want to post that back again with the little wiki summary, whatever that is again, to make sure I'm not going off on some random tangent. I'm recalling it as something where you can transfer experiences like memories, but that could be I could be completely wrong.
I'm going to put a little smiley so
now.
You can look at that later as well.
Yeah.
We have a super chat. Thank you, Dominic. I've been going through your back catalog and re-enjoying old episodes. Which old episode do you think deserves a go-over? P.S. I must plug narration-only versions once more. Heart.
I love the narration-only ones. The problem is you can't really, posting to SoundCloud, I do a narration-only version, a music-only version, and I can't really do that to YouTube. We did that one time with the Culture Show scale video because I put the music on there way too loud, so I turned around and put a new one out. YouTube penalized the heck out of you for splitting videos like that. It would literally murder the channel if I were to start doing a music-only and music-not-only version on YouTube. So if you really want to hear them without the music on, turn the narration-only version on and give yourself about 5 seconds between my little intro one-liner and the start of the main narration. That's usually about how much I space them out. And you can just listen to it without the music. What's my single favorite episode that I feel like should get more watches? Kind of that key one. Maybe the original Technological Singularity video, and Black Hole Farming's another one of the big ones. The Terraforming Techniques video from way back was probably the biggest catalog. I've always kind of wanted to do more of a compendium approach to that. And I'd say that's probably the key ones. I'd say always go back and watch those. But there's other ones where I was surprised they didn't do as well as I would have hoped, like the Double Planets and Roche Wars episode from way, way back. But a lot of those, I think we'll be doing Double Planets at some point anyway. A lot of those ones, it's if you like the title, give it a watch.
And Autumn Sun, thank you for your super chat. Have you seen the anime Planets? I'm guessing
it is.
Planets?
I think it is. Well, that's a good question. How do we pronounce that thing? So people have been recommending that to me for years, and I will say that Chuck Sonnenberg from SF Debris, it's a channel on YouTube and also a website, he got around to covering that show like a month or so back, and I watched the reviews of that, and I started watching the actual episodes instead, and I liked enough that it's going to be one of our poll options at the end of the month for what space development thing we should cover. And it's definitely a very interesting one. For those who are wondering, it's spelled like planets, only with an E between the T and the S, and planets, PLANETES, and they put up a little thing that says Wanderer, so that's what planets is, and I have no idea how that's supposed to be pronounced, so I think everyone just calls it planetes. That's what I'm going with. If that's not right, I have no idea. But it's about people doing space debris clearance in the late 24th century, and it can be silly at times, but it's also kind of spot on, little bits and pieces, so I do recommend it to other people too.
That leads into the follow-up question, which was, how realistic do you think that it is?
As fiction goes, pretty realistic. I mean, there's bits and pieces that are off again, and it is obviously designed mostly around telling an entertaining story. But it's got some neat bits. It's definitely, I feel like it's definitely got a strong root in hard science, and then obviously it meanders off at times, but nowhere to the degree that Doctor Who or Star Wars or honestly even Star Trek did. So hard enough.
A lot of super chats today. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions to the channel and the show. Horace the Great has a super chat question. Have you heard of the Alexia Bodrick and Gianna Mattire physical warp drive and one-way time machine by positive energy?
No, but yes. And I make this recipe pretty often. For some reason these days, everything sounds familiar to me, and I can never quite recall it. I think it's like some state of brain absorption of data where it's like, well, things aren't collating well enough. Everything sounds familiar. So if you've heard of this, as the answer for me, it's almost always, that sounds familiar. And it might be, or it might be completely random.
Okay, well, there's a follow-up question, and maybe this is one you want to look at later as well. Do you think the government is experimenting on this technology?
Without actually, I mean, if DARPA was screwing around with that would not surprise me in the least bit. They like to play with anything hypothetical like that. That's what their job is. And yeah, at the same time, just because you hear DARPA's messing with something doesn't mean that they actually have much interest in it succeeding or success or belief that it will. But again, I'd be curious how they think they could do time travel with positive energy. In terms of backward time travel, it's pretty easy to do with if you're using a positive energy supply like mass, regular mass, you can obviously slow time down, but I would be curious how they think they're doing it there.
All right, I think I'm going to fit 2 more questions in here before the break. We have a super chat from Dave Harrison. Thank you. Resource refining. You explained the energy, but what about the chemistry? How would you reduce the ore or melt out the silicate inclusions, for example?
Well, critically, I'm a physicist, not a chemist, so that tends to be why I focus there. There are a lot of folks who've gone into that in more detail. Blue Origins, I can't remember what the specific sub-thing for that was called. The Blue Origins project that I referenced in there about trying to actually do the solar panels made out of regolith goes into a lot of that there too. I think the biggest thing is I always tend to assume, because again, I'm not a chemist, so I tend to focus more on the brute force energy technique on that one, is if you just dump enough energy into it, you're going to find a way to refine the metal out of it and get the oxygen. But obviously, there's a lot of better chemical ways of doing that. But again, the problem is that I never really much liked chemistry. So I know my basics, I got through it fairly well, but after that point, I leave the more theoretical aspects of that up to people who actually enjoy the topic. And so I've seen the papers on it. I'd suggest those to you. They're going to give you a much better answer than I could.
This is going to be the last question before the break, and before you get your drink and snack, I'd encourage you to pop your question into the chat, and thank you, Maya Skill, and the others behind the scenes that are helping us to process those questions and get them up. Clash says, you probably don't remember, but last year on the SFIA Discord, you had a chat with a few of us on farming Mars. You mentioned aquaculture, and I was wondering how viable that would be at a large scale.
I need to spend more time on the Discord side. Something I do want to apologize to everyone who's on Discord audiences. I used to go over there and actually have like live audio chats with people at times too, and just exchange things. But the last year, or not just the kids, but like the 3 or 4 months before that, have been so insanely busy that when I'm down in the office, I try to focus on just turning the episodes over. And when I have had time, I try to get to the Reddit forum, which had been previously pretty neglected, or our actual main YouTube group. So I will try to start rotating back in there where I do remember that conversation, but not terribly well. Aquaculture is a logical approach to do on Mars because you can just dig a huge trench or crater, or take an existing crater and fill it with water. You do have to put something on top of that so it doesn't evaporate. Yes, you do have to put something on top of it, or the wood freeze on its own in most latitudes, and you have that water underneath. And so you could dome it over, keep that water fairly warm, and grow fish and plants in it pretty well. And so long as you put some kind of liner on the bottom, which we routinely do with ponds and reservoirs anyway, you don't have to worry about the chemistry on it getting too messed up from percolates. So I think that's as good an approach as, and then you just do hydroponics with the rest of that too. But the cool thing about aquaculture is there's so much thermal mass there that you don't have to worry about the temperature variation over the course of a day too much. So we're going to go to break. We're going to see you back here in about 5 minutes and go grab a drink and a snack and get more questions.
While we're on a break grabbing a drink and a snack, it's a great time to get more questions into our moderators. And I want to take a moment to thank everyone who moderates for us during this live stream or on our social media forums like Discord, Reddit, and Facebook, all of which are linked in our episode if you'd like to join the discussion. It tends to be a thankless job, though I'm glad to say that as social media groups go, the audience for SFIA tends to be a lot more courteous than the norm, and thank you all for that. I found that most shows our size or larger don't tend to have their creator read or reply to any comments. And I understand why, but for me, the generally positive and interesting comments from the audience are one of the parts I enjoy the most about the show. I'll refrain from adding that I tend to think writers, actors, and creators who complain about their own audiences on the occasions they deign to interact with them get little sympathy in my book, especially when it's legit criticism about not liking how they've adapted some pre-existing bit of a story or history, and I think they self-inflict some of the wounds by needlessly attacking rather than engaging that audience. But to be fair, there are some real jokes out there and people tend to zoom in on those comments more. It's human nature, along with getting prickly when criticized. I have no specific franchise in mind, incidentally. There have been so many adaptations or sequels of fan favorites in recent years, some pretty good, some pretty horrible, that it's almost its own specialized genre now, and it seems to involve a lot of needless fan baiting and criticizing. And it makes me grateful for an audience that mostly doesn't do that. And I've never seen the point in making nasty comments at someone who took the time to try my show out and didn't like it. Also, usually when we have an uptick in nastier criticism of SFIA episodes, often on my accent or impediment, it tends to coincide with an uptick in views and new subscribers, so I maybe have a bit of a Pavlovian response to nastier commentary. When we get lots of it, we are usually growing as a show. We have been of late, which brings it to mind, probably from a mix of me putting up some short-form content, bringing in some other bonus content over from Nebula, and doing those image polls to help pick topics. Hopefully a little is from improvement in my speech impediment too. For those curious, that's all been on the to-do list for a while, but back burner during the foster and adoption process Sarah and I have for our kids, who hopefully will be formally adopted by the next livestream so I can stop referring to them as Thing 1, Thing 2, and the Princess whenever referencing them publicly. Also, as welcome as it was to be asked to serve as the president of the National Space Society, that really is a huge honor and I try to give it the time and energy it deserves, it shoved things back a few months too. For our Nebula watchers, I switched over from doing extended editions to bonus episodes late last year as our team monitoring Nebula Reddit feedback said those were preferred, and since those are entire episodes, albeit usually shorter ones, some of those I'll probably bring over to YouTube as extra episodes after a year or so. Probably not all though, some I think YouTube will just decimate so they can stay there on Nebula, and the extended editions of episodes are too. For anyone wanting to join Nebula, there's a discount link in every episode, this one included, and this month's bonus episode there is Nomadic Miners on the Moon, and as a sneak peek, next month is going to be on retro causality, which had come in as the runner-up in 2 of our image episode polls, so I felt it deserved an episode. Also, for folks looking for summer reading recommendations, I was doing a reread of Robert Heinlein's young adult Scribner series from the 1950s in advance of our episode Have Spacesuit Will Travel, which is the name of the last book of that series, although his better-known novel Starship Troopers, written the next year, is sometimes considered the final work of that collection. The better part of a century later, while they show their age sometimes, they're still awesome and great for adults and young adults. They've got good audiobook narrations too. I also just started the novel Alien Neighbors by Nancy Gordon, who I got to meet and talk with during the ISDC earlier this year, and I'm only a few chapters in at the moment, but it's great thus far, and a nice near-future look at how a first contact situation might go, or go wrong for that matter. I also want to give a shout out to Robert Zubin's new book, The Case for Nukes, which I hadn't even heard was out till he told me about it at the ISDC and right after he ran out of copies to sign.
As with the case for space and the case for Mars, Zubin pulls no punches laying out his reasoning, and he makes a great case for why we need to see more use of nuclear energy on Earth and in space. If you got any other book suggestions for others looking to enjoy their inner bookworm this summer, post those in the chat or the comments below, along with your questions. And speaking of those, let's get back to our show and more of your questions. Go. All right. Welcome back to the second half of our live stream Q&A. Going back to a question about the Nozick thought experiment, I was misremembering that one. That's a brain in a jar concept of whether or not hedonism, in terms of is the greatest good just being happy for life. That's the thought experiment that covers that. We're not going to dip into that too much right now because I'm only that familiar with that one. It's not the one I was thinking about, but we'll try to get to that next time. So, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we have a few shout-outs. Canis Familiaris, thank you for your super chat. Miami's Last Capitalist, also a super chat. No questions, just saying hi Isaac, hi Sarah, and hi Arthur family. We have a super chat from Michael Peterson. Super chats are indeed a good way to grab attention to your posts, and the mods added either that or have a great question.
They both work pretty well, yeah.
So along those lines, Solarian8 said, hello, a somewhat silly question. How do you think games like Dungeons and Dragons will change in the future? Augmenting human intelligence will heavily change how these work.
I think the biggest one I've been seeing, and more of a post-COVID thing, I play D&D, it's actually Pathfinder, but D&D with one group that I've been doing for like 20 years now. And we've pretty much had to settle on doing it completely online since then because so few of us live in the same area. And I would say it changes the experience, but it's you get to be able to do a lot more complexity of character in terms of the dynamics because the computer can handle so much of the calculations. You have to do the pen and paper the whole time, which is hard if you're not like a mathematician. So it lets a different group of people play with more complexity. But we're going to get to a point with AI where I can say, well, I'm going to describe this scene to you guys, and instead of just picturing in your head, it's going to pop up a little AI prompt. Expect that to be probably one of the big things the next few years, I'd say, is someone like Roll20 is going to say, let's add an AI prompt generator in here so when the DM puts a prompt in, he can just show that picture to people. He or she, anyway. That would be the short-term one for that. Beyond that, active experiences like that, I think are still going to be a big seller of games. That's why I see there's so much of the MMOs, but it's so hard to predict the gaming environment. If I did, I'd publish a game and be a billionaire. But yeah, I would say it's definitely still going to have a role, though. It's not going to die, even if pen and paper itself gets less common.
Freedom Fiend, thank you for your super chat. You answered one of my questions before about the role of ceramics in the near future. As the technology develops, what materials or components do you think might be replaced with ceramic equivalents in the near future?
Windows. It is always possible we might get so good with doing diamond and growing diamond, microwaving diamond in a lab that we might start making windows out of stuff. But I think transparent ceramics is probably the biggest one that we'll probably see in the next, from an economic angle. That, and you see with the ceramic knives, a lot of edges because you get that very thin cutting surface. Those are the big ones that I can think of off the top of my head, but it's a huge game. It's like plastics. There's so many places you do with it, or metals in general. It's going to have an increasingly large role, though, in day-to-day household items, I'd say. But I forget.
I just was really stuck on this idea of diamond windows and whether or not those might replace engagement
Diamonds
rings,
are
or
Ghost's best friend.
how they used to bring panes of glass back in the pioneer ages and be like, would you marry me? Here's a pane of glass for your window. Maybe they'll bring them back in. Would you marry me? Here's some diamond windows for your house.
So I finally got a jaw-dropping question for my wife here, and it was the idea of diamond-sized windows. So.
No, windows that are made out of diamonds.
Diamond, yeah.
That would be sparkly. That would be really cool.
It would be cool. So I remember
you might need to be more than a billionaire to afford that.
We were talking about the remaining diamonds on Neptune and Uranus, and I remember that got dry too. So that sounds like an expensive interest.
At least with our windows.
Oh yeah, well, I love them.
I would love to replace our arched windows with diamonds. What do you think, husband?
No.
They are 6 feet across, or 5 feet across, and 6 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
And we have
And they're south-facing, so we...
we have at least, I don't know, 6 or 8 of those.
The person who designed this house loved large windows. And in the wintertime, it's amazing because it's having that sunlight in there is so spirit-raising. But in the summertime, with
it's
blackout
heat-raising.
curtains, because it's an air conditioning bill that you don't want otherwise.
So, Nabella, if the negative things required for faster than light were real, how do you think the laws of physics will handle the causality issue if you had to bet?
Badly. Well,
all right.
Something along the lines of the Nokia self-consistency principle, which Hawking also explored something similar to the idea that, I think I usually phrase it this way. You have any number of realities that can take place from moment A to moment B that will still get you back to there. There are a billion different pathways that have somebody walking into a room with you as planned with the exact same state, right? There's a lot of ways they can get there. Think of like a drop of water falling down. It can land anywhere on the continent. It ends back up in the ocean eventually. And over a lot of period of time, it will end up back in the same position. Maybe it follows a river. Maybe it runs down a roof. Maybe it runs down one side of the roof or the other. It gets there. But any pathway that doesn't have it getting there doesn't exist and will just fade out. It's basically, a draft version of a universe that doesn't get published. That's kind of the idea that you have with things like the Nokia self-consistency principle, is that only those self-consistent realities can happen. And the other ones will just fade out into quantum, which we have a precedent for, so...
Your audience is suggesting I need white gold trim on my diamond windows.
Uh-huh.
I like my
rose gold,
but maybe I could have rubies inset. How much would the construction of mega projects like ring worlds and the like be stunted by the fact that virtual worlds are likely to be a less expensive option?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat that because my brain said how much would be stunted by, if making them out of diamond. Which you might, too, by the way. All the ones that are on transparent sections, I usually knock, and a lot of people knock the idea of doing big windows in space habitats for sunlight to come through because glass. But if you make them out of diamond, then you could. It was whether or not they would ever build them because of VR. I think the
mega
issue,
projects. Did you want me to repeat it?
I think I got the idea, though, was that they wanted to know how much would be stunted by virtual reality. It would help for design.
How much would the construction of mega projects like ring worlds and the like be stunted by the fact that virtual worlds are likely a less expensive option?
Way less expensive. Although, here's the thing, right? Way less expensive on what metric? Because you think, well, I've built this incredibly elaborate thing that is so realistic, right? It's so realistic, it could pass for the real deal. Good enough. All right, now I hit the button that says, self-replicating machines, go make that. Because you actually did all the hard work there already. Right? The design was the hard part on that. Now the machine's going to go do that thing. How much effort does it really take to tell a bunch of self-replicating machines, go build me a gigantic metal cylinder out of that asteroid? And the answer is, how much does it take to tell a seed, go build me a forest?
So we have a super chat from SVS Guru 2000, but we already answered his question, so thank you. Astrovoid, would a ship be pushed by a stellar heat up from all the energy beamed at it?
I'm sorry, could you say that one again, please?
Would a ship be pushed by a stellar heat up from all of the energy beamed at it?
Oh, okay. Would a laser being pushed? Right. So if I'm hitting it with a big beam, right, and that's pushing along and reflecting off it, is it heating up? And the answer is yes, right? But it's being bounced off a mirror. The whole idea is to bounce off a mirror because if it's going in and getting absorbed, you are definitely heating up from that. But you're only getting one momentum bounce. When it bounces off the back, you get twice the momentum, right? Because it's going there and now going backward. So you get double the momentum. So you always want to bounce off of a mirror. And if I'm bouncing off a mirror that's, say, 99.9% reflective, which is not that hard to do, especially if you're calibrating for basically one wavelength, then you go ahead and say, well, I'm absorbing a gigawatt of electricity that's bouncing out energy that's bouncing out the back of me. That gigawatt is leaving 1,000th of that behind as heat. So now it's a megawatt. So you have to have enough radios to do that. And you have those radios on that mirror surface for the most part, too. And if you do that correctly, you might actually be able to do that non-omnidirectionally, so your waste heat's also giving you a little bit of thrust, but that's trickier. So the answer being yes, it could heat up your ship. If you wanted to heat up your ship, you can, though, right? You might decide that you would like to have segments of that big reflective mirror that are actually absorbing rather than reflecting, both for power generation, beaming sunlight to absorb it, and to heat the thing up, because you might want to heat up the object, like with a comet, to ablate it off.
So again, MySkill's doing a great job forwarding us the questions in the comments, and he sent me one. It was a super chat with a little meme from Simon Farmer that says, "I was there, the Isaac Drone Pizza Oven Idea 2023."
Simon, another one of our long-standing members of the Facebook community in particular.
Vincent Cleaver, thank you for your super chat. It says, clanking replicators seem dangerously useful for creating more habitat in deserts, on the oceans, in the tundra, up in the air, something short of heat pollution death. But replacing natural ecosystems? Atomic bear hugs. I'm not sure what the question on that is, but it did have a question mark.
I don't know, but atomic bear hugs is that his name? Was that a emoji?
No, it says atomic bear hugs. I think that is
awesome. I
think he's saying if you're replacing the natural ecosystem,
with machines.
Think about how you could have atomic bear hugs instead of just a regular old bear.
I don't know, but yeah. We had a black bear show up at Ball Honey Supply a couple of weeks back.
And then he visited the jail.
Had to go get a shot.
Turning himself in anonymously.
The sheriff posted a photograph. There's a bear trying to get in the jail. They go get a shotgun after that, just to be on the safe side. Not that would put the bear down, but it might scare it off. You shot it with some rock salt or something. But I got to protect the bees, protect the hive. So the question was whether or not you'd replace things with an ecosystem and to bring that rabbit trail in. Imagine if you re-engineered your bees to be instead of just collecting nectar, they also, like you send ants instead, say, I'm going to have you collect a kernel of corn. So they go march out into the field, and half the stuff, the cobs and stuff, they take down their nest to use for themselves, and the other half they march the kernels off and stick them in the silo for you. And you've programmed them to do that. You have to lay the pheromone trail down for them that does that, whatever it is. But that's an example of taking, existing ecosystems and turning them into machines. We talked about that with having squirrels be, programmed to pick up garbage in exchange for food pellets to augment their food supply, especially on space stations, where you might want to have a lot more squirrels and they would be supported by the local habitat naturally. I don't know that we should be thinking too much of there being that thick a line between machines organic and machines that we build. So
I just seen only the upcoming I'm only seeing the upcoming videos on my screen, and I didn't know if we were actually showing up in the chat. So if you want to check on that while I ask you the next question. It's actually from Godizi. What industries or businesses do you think will be big in the next 10 to 30 years?
Food delivery. I think we hit that one earlier. It looks like it's going okay. Food delivery would be a big one. Automated cars, that is going to be an increasingly big one. Oh, let's see. For ground-based stuff, let's go with those two for now, because I don't know if I can think of too many off the top of my head. Making diamond windows. Or transparent ones.
Oh, my.
But, I mean, making better, stronger windows. And solar and batteries, those are both going to be big ones, too. Hopefully nuclear, too, but I'm not so sure about that. So.
What is your favorite means of faster-than-light travel in fiction?
My favorite means... Well, my favorite means is kind of a toss-up between the infinite improbability drive from Douglas Adams and the one that Slutty Buffett has in the third book, the Beastromatics-driven one, which requires the breakdown of mathematics that occurs inside restaurants for calculating the bill, and takes those paradoxes and things, allows you to run a spaceship that can go faster than light while inside a restaurant by using Beastromatics. Those would be my two favorite ones. As to in terms of realism for faster than light travel, there's so many of them. That I would say probably Asimov's hyperspace generator from Foundation, because, and this is why it's my favorite, he just proclaims it works. He goes from point A to point B. There's no discussion of how it works. Just it does. And I like that because it says, I know this is impossible, but we need it for the story. Bam. That's it. No discussion beyond that.
Thank you for your super chat, Christian Corello. Could volcanic planets, such as the recently discovered LP791-18d, be more likely to retain a habitable atmosphere even while orbiting a red dwarf?
Oh, if you're outgassing, you can keep that supply of atmosphere going while something strips it off. And the question is, how much do you have to outgas? And this is a hard one for us to answer because we don't really have, like, Mars wasn't outgassing enough. We know that. Maybe Earth was, because we don't really know if the cometary bombardment was correct or not. That's our kind of best guess hypothesis. Io outgasses pretty heavily, but its gravity is way too low to stick around, and it actually flies off into space. Same for Pluto. Pluto outgasses, and stuff actually falls onto the plains of Mordor on Sharon, its moon. And yes, everything on Mordor, on Sharon, is the Lord of the Rings, which we actually went and saw the concert for that last night. So, if you didn't know, if you're in the Cleveland area, we were having the Cleveland Orchestras doing the Lord of the Rings. They play the movie in the background while they live play the songs very loudly. Just so you can still hear the audio. We did that last night. It was actually it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great.
It made me forget what the rest of the question was, though.
I think you got it.
All right, let's see.
The next super chat is from Bandersong. The new tech that improves productivity tends to just create time to produce more, resulting in no true gain to leisure. What will AI free us up to do?
More of what we actually would prefer to do personally, I'd say. I would dispute the idea that we don't gain leisure time. It's more that, so people tend to work to whatever degree they are comfortable with because there's always more stuff to get done. I literally phrase everything in my life as work because that's what my brain is, and it's because I have the word work in my head as problem solving or be productive in some way. That's just what it is to me. And so that's to me, working is being efficient with time, and I can do that with like leisure time too. I'm going to do this video game today because this video game, and I don't get to play them as much as I want, is good research for an episode. It helps we understand the space colonization of Stellaris better. That's kind of a perspective attitude. The idea that we don't get more leisure time is, I'm not sure that's really correct. The idea that our ancestors worked from dusk to dawn also is kind of a misnomer because they sat around talking to each other the whole time they were doing that. You're like, it's late night, I'm spinning a wheel, you're chatting with people, you might be playing games. They did have these things. So I feel like there's kind of a false dichotomy in that question. Now, and that's kind of the follow-up is the idea that if you have more and more automation, you eventually end up having no work to do. We're not there yet, and we're not going to be there anytime terribly soon. But that could happen one day. I'm not sure that's a desirable goal, and the idea that we want to have nothing but leisure time has never really struck me as an admirable goal either. But I don't think that's going to come up because I don't think the opposite of work is leisure time. I feel like there's a false dichotomy in that.
Not provided. Thank you for your super chat. Says, can you discuss the pancosmoria hypothesis and maybe do an episode on it? Or if you aren't familiar, would you look it up?
We're going to have to look that one up. I know panspermia. I don't know pancosmoria. Is that maybe like a black hole forming of universes concept? But I have no idea.
There's no further details, so you'll say yes, you can look that one up.
We'll look that one up.
Cosmic Treason says, would negative mass have negative extension in space?
Would negative mass have negative what?
Extension in space.
Does it push space out from it the way that mass contracts? Yes. The answer is yes. That's how that warp drive works. You're expanding space behind it and contracting in front. So, yes.
All right. We have a personal question from Marcus Postma. Is Isaac a member of any veterans organizations such as the American Legion or VFW?
Yeah, I'm a lifetime member of the VFW Post 5, the Geneva, Ohio Post. I haven't been there in a few years because we moved to Plymouth, but I'm a lifetime member. I joined actually as soon as I got back in the country from my last post overseas to Iraq. That's the only veteran organization I'm part of, though I'm also an ORP veteran rep for the area too. So.
Thank you for your super chat. I have two questions. What happened to Hades 9? And also, would it be possible to build a birch planet around a quasar? Quasar. Sorry.
Off gun. I had to. But I actually just talked to Nick Talmont the other day about that. We hadn't talked to each other in a couple of years. We just bumped into each other on LinkedIn. I think that one is pretty much thoroughly dead at this point. He's moved on to other projects, so a lot of his team came with him to go to other software projects. It is the kind of game that, as I think as you said, the one that kind of got away. A lot of games, they make a lot of progress, then kind of hit that wall, and unfortunately, I don't think that's going to get resurrected, but it was a lot of fun to work on. I've worked on a few other video games here and there in a conceptual role, and I never had as much fun as I did with that one. So maybe another time. But I love that. It was a great plot that we had building for that. There was the other question about quasars.
Would it be possible to build a birch planet around a quasar?
Yes, and in fact, one of the ways that you power that birch planet is basically by feeding mass into it to keep your electric production going on. And you have to be very careful feeding that mass in as directly as possible so you're not doing too much power production, because again, a quasar is very, very powerful. That was actually kind of how the quasar cannon short episode came up. Was a friend of mine, Larry, he had suggested, he had asked kind of what would happen if a planet fell into one of these, and just the way it got phrased made it back to me, because he asked my wife, who said it to me, was, well, couldn't you do that as like a weapon, like you load a bullet of a planet size into a giant black hole and fire a beam out the front of it? And I thought that's a quasar cannon, or doing the planet specific version as opposed to a stream. The quasar cannon, in my mind, is where you throw a stream of mass into it constantly for basically a big beam, and the Obhoff gun, as we'll call it, is where you load a planet into the chamber and fire that. Oh my.
We have 2 follow-up questions from Demaker.
I'm pretty sure it's the most destructive weapon ever conceived. Unknown science.
Furthermore, would there be a limit to the size of a black hole for a birch planet? And such as a black hole the size of 1 billion solar masses or 100 billion?
Mm-hmm. Well, the limitation I put on that is about 1 trillion solar masses. I'd have to recheck the exact number, but it's right around that zone. When you're talking to roughly the mass of the galaxy or above, and this is ignoring frame drag, which limits you just a little bit, like I think it's about 3/4 the radius. But if you load it all in there, you get to a point where the event horizon has a surface gravity that's 1 gravity. And once you get to that point, any birch planet you build bigger than that has lower gravity than that. So you either have to be inside the event horizon, which is probably still a bad idea, or you need to have lower gravity to build a birch planet beyond that. And you could check out the exact number, like the tropes Xeon black hole calculator, but it's about 1 trillion solar masses in that region is where you hit that maximum. You could go bigger, but then you can't have surface gravity of 1g. You can't have Earth-like gravity. You have to go for like Martian gravity. And you could have progressive layers. You could build another layer above that had lower gravity, but that bottom layer cannot be above 1g once you get around 1 trillion or 1.5 trillion, whatever it was.
Cosmic Treason says, in your opinion, will we have 1 million inhabitants on Mars before or after we have it in the belt?
I think you'd have them in the belt beforehand. And the question then becomes, what's an inhabitant? Because technically nobody inhabits Antarctica, but there's a couple thousand people there. So, but I'd say that you're probably going to get that in the asteroid belt. Well, let me rephrase that. I think you're going to get that on asteroids. We kind of have to be careful, because a lot of times we're talking about how awesome asteroids are. We assume the belt, but in reality, you got the Trojans of Jupiter, and more importantly, you got all those near-Earth asteroids, and there are like 20 or 30,000 of them. And those are the ones you're going to settle first, is those. Possibly excepting like Ceres or Vesta. So the near-Earth asteroids are probably a place that's going to force get that big space population.
Freedom Fiend says, thank you for your super chat. I find it rather bothersome that AI seems to be displacing art before menial labor. Mm-hmm. That said, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so the first job that computers killed was the job title of computer. The Harvard computers that helped out on a lot of the space projects are an interesting area of history. They're a great group of women who just did so much math to help progress the area. But we replaced computers with computers. And if you look at the old Asimov works, who actually refer to people by the title of computer, computer Twizzler from End of Eternity. But if people think of robots as replacing, blue-collar jobs, and they certainly have in many cases, but we always have so much more manufacturing to do that we can replace that. It's the white-collar jobs that tend to die from that, and the creative class of jobs will too, in a lot of cases. Somebody can write a script pretty quickly these days. I think the scripts that AI turn out right now are garbage, but a lot of scripts that get put out by idols are garbage too.
Moving on, Macrodose with the super chat says, will you be playing Starfield, and should we expect what we find out there to actually be out there?
Maybe, and no. I expect the universe to still turn out to be a lot weirder than we expect. It's either going to be incredibly mundane, or it's going to be something really weird. Like you get out there, like wow, we bumped into a television screen. What is this? Wow, the universe is not the least bit like we thought it was. The universe at the moment appears to be very mundane and empty, but we should never rule out the possibility that you have to get off on like simulation hypothesis that we are really just fundamentally wrong about how things work. I would say always leave that back door for your sanity, at least in your head, so that if the world does turn out to be really weird, you don't have your head explode. So.
And the last question for today is, how are you in general? So I think people would like to know, is there anything else in general sense that you would like to share with your audience for the...
That's a tricky question. I'm doing good. I'm enjoying my role as the president of the National Space Society. I had a great conversation with Anala Trio from the Multiplanetary Society the other day. That was a great conversation. I've gained to talk to all sorts of wonderful new people. I've had an occasion to chat with them in recent times, and I'm loving being a father of 3 kids, and I'm particularly loving being a husband to a wonderful wife, which is really awesome. Life is good. I enjoy it. I need to finish my greenhouse. That's been like the back project since the wind blew it down. That's like the big delay there. Other than that, life's going great. And on that wonderful note, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another monthly live stream. If we missed any of your questions, feel free to put them in the comments on the episode, and we'll see you on Thursday. But if you don't want to wait, you can check out any of this month's recent episodes, or see our bonus content over on Nebula at go.nebula.tv/Isaac Arthur. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great week.